Hey everyone, it's Maria and Amelia here. Welcome to Real Conversations with INFJs and INFPs. This is season 1, episode 4. It's good to be here with you today.
It is wonderful to be here with you today. Maria is an INFJ and the author and facilitator of the Integration Mentor Program. She is an MBTI certified practitioner and personality profiler. She is also founder of the Sumalov Academy of Human Integration and the INFX Project. She has also written 2 best-selling courses, which are wonderful, and called the 4 People Within, which is an extension of Jungian work, and the INFX Unveiled, the INFX Deep Dive, and INFX Mastermind, all which show INFJs and INFPs how to live a more authentic and productive life. When she is not busy with work, which seems like all the time, she is spending time with her partner, Peter, and their collection of beloved dogs and horses.
And you will be happy to know I just purchased a new horse, so one more. And Amelia here, of course. Yeah, and Amelia, of course, here for you, those of you who don't already know her. She's an INFJ and a mentor who helps people become free of their emotional past and emotional abuse in the past. With her work, clients finally move on from what's been holding them back. And she is a fully qualified integration mentor. So she's done the Integration Mentor Program and loves helping clients transform themselves. And when Amelia is not working, she is looking at her own personal development and self-development. She also spends time in her garden. I'm still waiting on those zucchinis, by the way. And she loves reading, cooking, and walking her large doggo, which, of course, I think most of us here are animal lovers. So that is Amelia. Welcome, everyone, to today's session. So today we're geeking out. It is just one of those episodes today that we're going to look at the theory and the practical application of the 4 People Within for both INFJs and INFPs. And so today, if you're a geek like myself, I hope you'll enjoy today's session. What are we starting with, Amelia, today?
I think it's first important to recognize that if you are new to this information and if you haven't heard this information before, this can be a lot and this can feel overwhelming, possibly. New terms, new things, it can be a lot, and this is can be quite technical for some people. So if this is overwhelming, if this is too much, remember, you don't have to get this all perfectly. You most likely won't get it the first time. It has taken people years to fully understand this work. And then the interesting thing with this work is once you understand it, there's always something else to learn. So you'll never get this perfectly. Right. This will most likely be strange and complex, and this is okay, and that is normal. So just before we start, I always just like do a blanket statement of that. So. All right. So with that,
I appreciate it. Thank you for doing that. Sorry. Thank you for doing that. And I just do want to say, yeah, absolutely. Thank you for saying that. Thank you so much on behalf of everyone else. And a lot of what we're talking about today, you can actually find in the 4 People Within free ebook. You can head on over to marysumalov.com and grab it from there. So sorry, I interrupted you, Amelia. Please continue.
So who are these 4 people within?
So the 4 people within are the different parts of our personality. So when we align those 4 people who live and reside within us, the thinker, the feeler, the sensor, and the intuitive, then we can become the absolute best version of ourselves. And that best self has the power to achieve everything that we have capacity to achieve. So it's not about saying, oh, I'm going to be an astronaut, so therefore I'm going to be, if you don't have the physiological capacity to be an astronaut, you may not be able to be an astronaut. But if you, according to your capacity, whatever you want to achieve, you can once you align those 4 people within. And this inner alignment, of course, is the ultimate lottery win, only it's not up to chance, it's up to you.
And that's so important and exciting to hear, because that really shows people that they have the power over their life, maybe in ways that they have not seen so far, which most people, I think, can feel quite disempowered with things. But it's like, hey, you do have the power to change things, which is one reason why I love that quote personally. And what are the 2 ways we engage in the world?
Yeah, so there's 2 predominant ways, which I think I might go into a little bit more detail today than perhaps anticipated. So stop me when it gets to be too much, right? You're the police of this conversation, because I can talk about this forever. So the 2 ways that we engage with the world is how we collect information and then how we make decisions. So, of course, depending on what information we collect, we then make decisions based on that. So let's just say that we're super unintegrated and we're collecting information that's biased. Then we are likely to make biased information or biased decisions. Or let's just say if we collect information and we are open to different ways of collecting information, sensing what's going on around us, through the 5 senses. What do we see? What do we hear? What's actually going on, as well as maybe intuiting what could be going on behind what I can see right now. Then we tend to start making a little bit better decisions, because we're now opening up the repertoire of our capacity, if you like, to collect information. But in order to make good decisions, we must make sure that we have to check our biases, and we all have those. Have you had like a super bias? Because I used to have this thing where, every relationship that I was in with a man, I would be projecting, I would see everything through the glasses of my past hurts, and I would project onto that person that they were behaving in a certain way. And I kept collecting that information as opposed to treating them as an individual person outside of my past, and then using the sensory as well as the intuitive, in a positive way to collect positive information. Have you had that kind of experiences in maybe other areas of your life, or there anything there that you can relate to?
And the more, I feel like trying to stay on topic with this, but
sure.
I feel like we can do this if we had a challenging, confusing, unsettling, unsecure childhood or period of life after childhood. We can feel like things are going on that actually aren't going on.
Right.
And when that happens, we take this information that we learned as a kid and we keep playing that out in the world, which is essentially making those biased decisions, because it's like, oh, this person's trying to hurt me, this person's trying to throw me off guard, this person's trying to get a sense of power over me, when in reality it's not that way. And I have absolutely done that many times in the past, and we all do this, and so we'll also never get perfect at this, but it can get a whole lot better, and you can get a lot healthier the more you remove these biases and things you project onto people.
Yeah. And I just want to make a comment here at this stage, because there are probably going to be people who are tuning in who have experienced huge amount of abuse, even maybe abusive relationships in their grown-up life and so on, who might kind of stand up and say that's BS, not everybody is a good person. And it's absolutely true, not everybody is a good person. But if we don't give them a chance to be a good person, if we don't give them a chance, and a lot of INFJs and INFPs do tend to attract people like narcissistic people or, delusional people and so on. And that that is a fact because of the kind of the intuitive feeling components. We can feel like, you know, we can see the good version of that person, even sometimes more easily than the bad stuff initially, and then it starts going downhill from there. So we're not talking about trusting people who aren't trustworthy. We're not talking about not protecting yourself against people that you need to protect yourself against. We're talking about that other 99% of people in our lives that are not abusive towards us. So that's whom we're talking about there. So yes, there is abuse that goes on, and we've all experienced that too, even in the adult realm. And especially if we have those childhood wounds, that say a narcissistic parental wound, we're likely to attract narcissistic people on our path because we feel comfortable or we feel familiar with that dynamic. So we can kind of latch on to that dynamic really quickly. So this is not, when we're saying don't expect everybody to be a bad person, also don't expect everybody to be a good person. Just let them show you through their actions who they are, and believe them when they show it to them. I think it was Maya Angelou that said, when a person shows you who they are for the first time, believe them. So give people that opportunity to show you who they are. So don't take that away. That's what we're really referring to with the bias conversation. At least that's my understanding. Did you have more to add to that, Amelia?
Nope, that was a great buttoning up of that end, because you just made a lot of good points with you don't know. I think also a danger of the intuitive feeler, it's like you can think that you know what's up with someone and what the person's motive, and that can keep you
good
in a
and
place.
bad.
Yes. And you know, it's good because you can really relate to people, but it's bad because if you put your own biases with that, it can keep you quite trapped.
And a lot of INF types feel very lonely and misunderstood, and it's a very unpopular opinion, or it's not even an opinion. It's a discovery over doing research with our thousands of clients that we've worked with for over the last years, that a lot of INFJs and INFPs create a lot of self-isolation because they can't trust people, because they can't see past their own biases. And again, this is everything you hear with this work, you need to understand that there's either extreme is bad. So it's not good to always assume that you're wrong either, and it's not good to always assume that you're right. So life's unfortunately not that black and white. It would be great if it was, but it's not. So those are the two ways that we engage with the world. We collect information and we make decisions. And we also have two orientations that we have. We have the inward orientation, which is self-referencing, which is subjective. And we have the outward-facing orientation, which is more objective in relation to you, in relation to other things, and less self-referencing, as in more referencing towards the outside world. And of course, both, again, good and bad sides, depending on to what extreme you bring either. So the point of the integration work that we're doing with INFX project with the Sumirov Academy of Human Integration is that we look for a balance. We're not looking to be overly this or overly that, or this is good and this is bad. It's like there's good and bad in everything, which we'll be talking about shortly when we go into the roundtable model. What are the kind of the perceived negatives that people often talk about when it comes to INFJs and INFPs, and what are actually the positive sides of those negatives, so that we can bring a lot more balance into that space. So the two ways of orientation with the four people that live within us, two of those are outward oriented and two of those are inward oriented. Now, this is my hypothesis because according to actually Myers-Briggs company, who have created the framework for INFJs and INFPs, I'm going to go super geeky right now. So if you don't follow, don't worry about it. If you listen to it in a year's time, again, you might know what I'm talking about if you're just new to this. But according to Myers-Briggs company, they don't assign an orientation for the tertiary process, so our 10-year-old inner child, because there hasn't been enough evidence to one way or another, so toward it being a certain orientation or it not being a certain orientation. So my hypothesis is, according to the work that I've done with thousands of people all around the world, is that the tertiary function is, in my opinion, this is my opinion because I am a certified MBTI practitioner and I can have my own opinion on this, is that the tertiary function is oriented the same way as the primary function, which of course is what we call the adult self. But we'll get into that a little bit later on. But we have two ways of orienting ourselves. There's the inward orientation, which is how we perceive ourselves and the relationship we have with ourselves, and the outward orientation, which is how do we perceive ourselves in the context of the outside world, and how do we exist in the outside world as the person that we are. But yeah, we have two orientations. We also have two ways of collecting information. There's the intuitive way, which of course INFJs, introverted, intuitive, feeler, judger, INFPs, introverted, intuitive, feeler, perceiver. So we have anybody who's an INFJ or INFP is predominantly an intuitive information collector. But then, of course, there's the sensing way of collecting information as well, which then for us as INFJs and INFPs tends to be a less developed part of us and is either outward or inward facing in its orientation, depending on your type. And we'll get into that when we look at the roundtable models. And then we have two ways that we make decisions. So we have the thinking and we have the feeling. And as INF types, intuitive, introverted, intuitive, feeler types, our predominant way to make decisions is feeling. Now, again, the orientation of that depends on your type. And the second way of making decisions, which of course is the thinking way, is one of our less developed parts of us, so one of our inner child parts of us. And again, its orientations inward or outward facing, depending on your type, and we'll get into that shortly. But basically, the bottom line is that how we collect information decides how we make decisions, so it determines that. And before we commit to any piece of information fully, I like to ask myself some questions. So before I make any kind of definition of the information that I've collected, I have some questions that I like to ask. And one of them is, am I able to take a step back, completely just take a step back from the situation and observe it real time and see what's really going on? So being objective or outward facing, and use my sensory acuities to, okay, so what can I actually see? Not what I think is going on, but what can I actually see? What's actually there? Okay, here's a computer, there's a camera, there's Amelia. Amelia's wearing a red and black shirt. You know, these are the things. So I'm not thinking, oh, I wonder what Amelia's thinking. That's not this qualification at all. It's like, am I able to take a step back and observe the situation real time to see what's really going on right now? Then the next question I ask is, am I assigning subjective meaning to what I'm observing? So a subjective or inward facing sensing consideration. So am I kind of saying, well, you know, Amelia used to always think this when she was, you know, when this is what her facial expressions tell me. It's, you know, her mannerism is saying this, she seems tense, she's always tense. Well, obviously you're not tense at all, you're super relaxed. Just tuning into this, but it's like I'm referencing to what has happened before and making interpretations of what you're giving me now in relation to what's happened before. So it's not about now. So that's an inward sensory. What can I see Amelia doing? What is Amelia doing? She's always been doing this. So that's the second consideration. Am I assigning my subjective past experiences to mean something about what I'm observing right now? Then the third question I ask myself is, what else could be going on that I can't see right now? So now we're going into the intuitive space, so the objective or outward facing intuitive consideration. So I'm like, okay, what could be going on there for Amelia? is she thinking what, questions she might ask, or is she thinking about a personal experience that she's had about what we're talking about? What I'm kind of like, what's Amelia doing? What is she thinking? And it's a real kind of real time. Where's she going to take this? Which way is this going to go? This could be possible. That could be possible. So that's a real outward intuitive consideration. So what else could be going on that I can't see right now? And then finally, number 4, what I'm seeing right now make sense to me in relation to other information that I've already collected about the issue? So this is like a subjective or inward intuitive consideration. So I have this library of information, and I have all these things in my library about what could have been going on in the past and how things played out, and trying to kind of foresee things of how they might go. So, oh, Amelia has this particular, facial expression. So that means that, this is probably what's going on for her. And I'm going to make that intuitive leap to say, when she looks at me like that, that's what it means. So that's the question. Does what I'm seeing right now make sense to me in relation to other information that I've collected in the past? So is this in line with who I believe Amelia is? So they're the kind of ways, they're the questions, almost like qualifying questions that I ask myself before I make any definition on any information that I'm collecting. If I want to be integrated, I want to make sure that I am collecting all the information that I can, and that I'm using all my faculties, or all the faculties that are available. Because whether you have inward or outward sensing, whether you have inward or outward intuition, in your around your round table, in your shadow table as an INFJ or an INFP, you will have the other side of it. So if I have an inward intuition, which I do at my adult self position on my round table, my shadow adult self is an outward intuition. So I want to practice that as well. I don't want to just rely on these 4 parts of me, even though it is the 4 people within, but the 4 people within all have a shadow that has a different orientation. So I want to practice everything. And it's a nice little checklist. 1, 2, 3, 4, and just do your best. Don't try to get it perfect. Any comments on those from your end, Amelia, before I go into 4 decision-making qualifiers?
Yeah, let's just take a break for all the listeners, because that was a lot of information real quick.
Sorry.
Secondly, first of all, just staying open. You might be like, man, I don't know about this. This is a lot of, I don't know about this. And just staying open to this might be true can help bring insights to some of your behavior. So just like, I don't know about this, but like, we'll see what happens, other than like, I don't see this, and then close the door on that. That can help bring insight later, because you might be doing something and then you're like, oh, that was my inward intuition, or doing something and it's like, oh, that was this part of me. So just keep open to it. I get that it might be kind of weird and new information, or a lot. So I hear you. I completely get it. I've been there. So just stay open to it. And then also something that you mentioned, with having all the information you can, is that sometimes you can't get 100% of the information, or have the information that you want when you need to make a big decision. And in that case, you just have to make the best decision you can and go forward with it, and do what you can with that decision. So just a couple things that I thought as you were talking.
The brilliant points. And also, it's not nearly as important to make the right decision as it is to make a considered, aware decision. So being conscious of the decision that you're making will then give you an opportunity to review the performance of that decision that you make. So don't be afraid of making bad decisions. Because if you use it as a way of failing forward, and you find out, okay, I don't want to do that anymore going forward. If you're making those bad decisions consciously, then you can learn from it, and then you can keep failing forward and keep going toward your goals. So those are really good points, Amelia. Thank you for that.
Yeah, you are welcome.
Shall we go into the decision side of things, the qualifying questions that I use?
What'd you say?
Shall we go into the decision-making questions, the qualifying questions that I use?
Let's do it.
Okay, so based on examining the information that I'm collecting, then I move into making a decision based on those. So of course, I'm aiming to make well-rounded and deliberate and authentic decisions. And in order to do that, I have these 4 questions that I ask myself. 1, is this the most effective way of doing this? So this is, of course, the outward-facing thinking consideration. So is this the most effective way of doing this, getting this thing done that I need to get done? The second thing is, do I have all the facts pertaining to this decision, which means that it's a subjective or inward-facing thinking decision. So what don't I already know? What do I need to know that I don't know that I need to find out before I make this decision? The third question is there, is this what I'm doing right now, or I'm intending to do? Is this the most harmonious way of going about this for both myself and for other people? So this is an objective or outward facing feeling consideration. So we're asking about the harmony. And then finally, is this authentic to me? Now, if you're an INFP, you're going like, no, this is the first question I'm asking, is this authentic to me? And that's fine. They don't have to be in this order. They're just in a order. So does this feel authentic to me to make this decision? And this, of course, is a subjective or inward-facing feeling consideration. So when you look at those 4 qualifying ways, is this the most effective way? Do I have all the facts? Is this the most harmonious thing? And finally, is this authentic to me? Then you usually make pretty good decisions. And don't forget, your decisions are based on the information that you've collected. So if you've collected corrupt information, all of these are not going to be as effective as they are if you just teach yourself to collect information in both inward and outward facing, sensory and intuitive ways.
Awesome. And are all the questions that you just asked, and then with the information collecting as well, are these all in your ebook?
They're all in the ebook. Yeah, you can just grab the ebook from marysimilov.com. Yeah,
cool.
For people with an ebook.
Awesome. You ready to go to the round table?
What else should we talk about today? Yeah, let's do the round table. But before we go into the actual models, maybe should we talk a little bit about the whole premise of the round table?
Yes. Great question.
Okay.
So what is the round table, and why is it important for INFJs and INFPs?
Okay, so the round table is a model that we've created throughout the time that we've been working with INFJs and INFPs in particular, but with other types as well. And those 4 people within us, the sensor, the intuitive, the thinker, and the feeler, they compose that round table. So they're in different positions of that round table. And to give you an understanding of these different parts of you and their level of maturity, we've named them as the adult self, which is the most practiced and comfortable part of us, our flow state, the adult self. Then we have the inner parent, which is the part of us that balance out the adult self and offer support for the adult self. We have the 10-year-old inner child, which is the tertiary or the third most fluent or developed part of us. And then we have the 3-year-old inner child, which is the least sophisticated and least experienced part of us, the one that we're usually least aware of. And if this all sounds a bit weird, just stick with me. It'll not soon make sense, especially when we look at the roundtable models. The purpose of this model is to teach you to shift perspective between the 4 different parts of you, the sensor, the intuitive, the thinker, and the feeler, so that when life brings you a problem to solve, and of course we all know that it does, the world gives you problems, it's a smorgasbord of issues or things to resolve at times, then you can inspect the issue from the perspective of your 2 ways of collecting information, your intuitive and your sensory parts of you, before you make a decision with more rounded decision using the feeling and the thinking faculties. So what I'd like to do is just to give you a little bit of a description of what these different parts of you does. And then we will move on to the INFJ and INFP roundtable models, and we'll go into more detail with that. So the adult self is the most fluent part of you. It's the part that sets the direction of your life as the person that you are. So who you are as a person, your aspirations, your, what you want to achieve in life, how you want to live. Your adult self oftentimes determines that. This is the part of you that you use most easily, and that ones that is usually most developed as well. It's also the part of you that people think about when they think about you. So if you're like an inward thinker, predominantly, people often kind of think, oh, they're a deep thinker, or they're this, I want to get this person's opinion on a conundrum that I have going on. So for INFJs, of course, it's an inward intuition, and with that inward intuition, people see us as multi-layered, intelligent, and deeply caring and connective kinds of people. And for INFPs, other people often see them as principled and really highly empathetic, and I have this, it's not really a word, but when I see INFPs, especially when they're in their power, it's this, they have this global vision of how everything should be, what is the morality of things. So that's kind of the adult self. Others see us as often how our adult self shows up. So that's the adult self. The inner parent is there, as I said, to balance out the adult self, because the inner parent is opposite in both orientation and in function. So if your adult self is a decision maker, then your inner parent is automatically an information collector, and vice versa. And if your adult self, which for INFJs and INFPs is inward facing in its orientation, then the inner parent is automatically an outward part of us. So the inner parent has two jobs: to balance out the adult self and to act as a bridge between the adult self and the inner children. And we'll talk about the inner children shortly. So the 10-year-old inner child is a part of you that you've experienced, that has experienced, like a real child, has experienced life just enough to feel like they know how everything works. And just like many 10-year-old inner children, or normal children, the inner children operate in a very black and white approach to life. It's like, this is my experience, so here's how it is universally across the board for everyone. So the main role of the 10-year-old inner child, though, is to support the grown-up parts of you and to keep in mind the cause and effect of everyday life. So unfortunately, most of the time, the 10-year-old inner child enters into like a power struggle with the inner parent, because they have the same job, but they have a different orientation. So inner parent and 10-year-old inner child either both collect information or make decisions. And if the 10-year-old inner child is very strong, it can get into a power struggle, or they can get into a power struggle with the inner parent, because they're doing the same job. The orientation, according to my hypothesis, is the same as the adult self. So it is the opposite orientation of the inner parent, which also gives that extra bit of problem there for the parenting, for the inner parent to do the parenting, because for INFJs and INFPs, the inner parent is outward facing. And because we're an introverted person predominantly, and the 10-year-old inner child is introverted as well, according to my hypothesis, and the adult self who's introverted and the 10-year-old inner child who's introverted, they have the opposite functions, which means that one makes decisions and one collects information depending on if you're an INFJ or an INFP. And what can happen is that we can enter this very subjective life experience where we don't take the outside world or the outside feedback into consideration. So we become very self-oriented if we allow the 10-year-old inner child to complement the adult self instead of the inner parent. And finally, there's the 3-year-old inner child, and they are the least fluent and most vulnerable part of you. So they are highly they are so easily affected by the surroundings in general and the thoughts that you have about yourself. And that's oftentimes where, with the inner children, a lot of the fears and the worries live within us. And the role of the 3-year-old inner child is to balance out the adult self in either information collecting or decision making, because adult self and 3-year-old have the same job. For intuitive feelers, or introverted intuitive feelers, we have, because we're highly intuitive, then one of the inner children is often a sensory type, and the other one is a thinker. So those are the kinds of, I just wanted to kind of throw that in there. I hope it's not confusing too much. So while the relationship is similarly competitive between the inner parent and the 10-year-old inner child, because they have the same job, there can be a power struggle between the adult self and the 3-year-old inner child, but it's not as fair, because your most mature part, which is your adult self, is fighting your least sophisticated or most vulnerable part of your 3-year-old inner child. So we want to bring it so that they all look after each other, as opposed to enter these power struggles. Does that make sense so far? I know that could be a lot of information, but yeah, did you have any comments on that, Amelia?
The better decisions you make means that the more together these 4 parts of you feel, the more looked after they feel, the more they understand and hear each other. So it's like, and this is like what's kind of going on, a description of it, but it's like inside your mind, it's like it feels calm versus chaotic. And you make decisions when you're calm versus based on fears and doubts and the things you can't see that are going on in your subconscious or unconscious. And the power of this work is to bring these parts of you together so you can live a happy and meaningful life in a way that's right for you, not for everyone else. It's like, what is right for you, and you know that, and by bringing these together, you can get there one step at a time.
Exactly. That's beautifully said. And also, I do want to say, as a certified MBTI practitioner, because there's a lot of stuff going on online, which is like all INFJs this or all INFPs that, or if you're an INFJ, you can relate to these things, or you can't, or you're not a real INFJ if you don't have all these checklists that you can tick. Like, that's a real inner child, black and white kind of way of thinking about things in general, like real inner 10-year-old. But what I will say is that with the MBTI in particular, if any one of you you've done the global step 2 assessment that gives you the facet results. It shows you as an INFJ how you are different, and how and not just how you're unique in your own 20 facets that you have a unique score on, but how you're also different to the standard INFJ. So you might there's this like almost like a significant proportion of INFJs are in this kind of sit in this kind of container. You might be out here in some of your facets. So you might be very different in certain ways as an INFJ from other INFJs. So when we're talking about all of this, all INFJs, these are just the basic gross parameters that we're talking about today, the 4 people within. And then if you want to take a deeper dive into that, you're going to find more specific things about yourself as you go along. So thank you for saying that, Amelia. That I think that's very helpful to note that, you know, there's a lot less warring inside of you, but even with those 4 people within, that all INFJs have the same, there's still going to be aspects of them that you're going to keep working and maximizing on. You know, when the 4 different people really work together and support one another, everybody can shine. And with, for example, our team culture in the business is, you know, we are all individuals and we're an important part of the whole, but the team wins or loses all together. And the same is true for our inner family. The inner family will either succeed or not succeed together. So if they work together, they can succeed together. If they don't work together, they're just not going to necessarily, you are not going to reach the goals that you want to reach if you're not integrated. So shall we go into the specific round tables? Would that work for you?
Yep, ready when you are.
Yep. Do you mind doing a screen share on the INFJ? There we go. Perfect. Okay, so this is the INFJ round table, the inner family round table. And for this, if you're listening to this on as a podcast and you're not seeing this, so if you're not on YouTube watching this, head on over to marysumalov.com, grab the ebook, and these are in the appendices. So you can grab those from there. So for the INFJ, we have the adult self, the inward-facing intuition, which we call the witness. Now, the witness is, as you already know, as an intuitive part of us, for the INFJ, it's all about observing the patterns and recognizing them, and how the different patterns relate to one another, and then filling in the information between what's not seen. So being able to really make those intuitive leaps. So as I said before, and you can see on this screen here, the witness is an information collecting part for the INFJ. And so the INFJ, and when we talk about the INFP shortly, it's a little bit different because INFPs actually lead with a decision maker, whereas INFJs lead with an information collector. Okay, then we have the unifier inner parent, who is the outward feeling part of us. So the unifier is consumed by the interpersonal dynamics of people and situations. And so it concerns itself with the level of harmony and happiness amongst everyone and the atmosphere that is being created by everyone. So without the unifier, the world would lack acts of compassion, care, and support. And because, of course, they're an outward-facing part of us, they receive the sense of self from the reflections of others. And that's why for INFJs, because we have the witness, the inward intuition, and the outward feeling as our predominant way of being out there in the world, we can come across as, in the negatives, like a doormat, because we're always wanting everybody to get along. And we can see other people's perspectives because of the witness. The witness has seen so many different perspectives and have adopted all of those as a possibility, that's what could be going on. So we as INFJs often are portrayed as doormats and people who don't have good boundaries. And maybe we do feel like that, of course. And those are some of the biggest growing opportunities for us that we have, that we start to set boundaries, not out of hurting people. And there's certainly a lot of boundary myths and a big amount of boundary work in the full 4 people within program that you can grab if you're interested in getting into that more. But the point being that it's perceived that INFJs are always like this, but in fact, we're not. So when we have good boundaries, we turn into these people who can fully give from the heart, because we're also filling our own cup and not just trying to pour from an empty one for others. Did you have comments on that, Amelia?
Yeah, there's so much I could say. I don't really know where to say. But it seems like with this, the more work the INFJ does on strengthening their inner parent, the happier and more connected, more fulfilled they feel with other people and themselves.
Yeah.
So this is the real power horse of their inner work, is strengthening this part of them. And without a strong unifier inner parent for them, it's going to be very challenging to live a life that they feel any sense of control, or like they know who they are, or
Yeah.
They're happy with other people. So if you're an INFJ and you're feeling like that right now, this is a good place to start to learn how to get out of that mindset, because that's another myth about those INFJs. Always feeling alone. You're never, there's never anyone else like you. And I thought that for a long time. I swore for a long time. I was like, there's literally no one else like me. And the more I strengthen my inner parent, well, part of it's true. It's like I am absolutely.
Well, of course it is. Everybody's unique.
At the same time, everyone is.
Yeah.
But I was so alone with that it's like once I started getting to this inner parent, I stopped caring about being the only one, because it didn't matter anymore.
Right. And also with the inner parent, if you don't have a clear inner parent, if you don't have clear inner parenting skills here with the unifier, you don't consider yourself. You're just out there doing stuff. So if you override this inner parent unifier, a healthy you don't consider yourself. A healthy unifier asks, is this the most harmonious thing for me first and then for other people? So for me first, is this what I actually need to do, and then does it serve other people as well? So instead of going, is this going to keep everybody else happy? We don't want to do that. We want to say, okay, can I live with myself if I do this? And is this, am I honoring myself, and am I honoring others? That's really the kind of the big question for me on that. And as you can see there, the opposite functions, the adult self and the inner parent have opposite functions and opposite orientation, like we talked about earlier. Did you have more on that, or shall we go into the inner children?
I have so much more on that, but for time's sake, let's keep rolling.
Okay. If you have more questions, you want to talk about this more, you can contact us at desk@infxproject.com and ask questions. Maybe we might do a Q&A session at some point if we deem it that we haven't answered everyone's questions. Okay, so going into the scientist, the 10-year-old inner child, which is inward thinking. And of course, the scientist, as we talked about before, has the same function as the inner parent, so it's making decisions, but it has opposite orientation, which is the same orientation as the adult self, so inward facing. So the scientist is focused on keeping life accurate and measurable, and its point of reference is to the whole world, if you like. Originates from the self and the performance of the self in relation to what makes sense. So without the scientist, the world would be a very chaotic, disorganized place without any rules and due processes. So that's what the 10-year-old inner child can bring to the table. But if we look at I think probably the most common, I would say the most common perception of INFJs is the door slam in relation to the 10-year-old inner child, because the inner parent unifier has been overridden for so long, and we haven't looked after our own needs. We've exhausted every other opportunity, and we have no other way than to deal with the situation than to slam the door on people. But when we arrive to that point, we're already there. We're thinking, okay, this is what I'm doing. This makes sense. It makes sense to protect me. So this is what I'm doing. So at that point, the 10-year-old scientist kind of jumps in and says, we need to do this if we want to if we want to survive this situation, this is what we need to do. And I want to bring that door slam into a bit of a perspective, because there are a lot of people who defend the door slam and even take pride in it. And from my perspective, it is a rite of passage. So I do think that every INFJ has to have a conscious door slam experience so that they have that power in their back pocket. Because when you do it consciously, you eventually realize that, it doesn't have to be the only way to set boundaries. And that's where the unifier can really emerge and start setting those boundaries. before it gets to that point where you have no other option than to slam the door. And I know we've done some videos before on this topic, and there are a lot of people who really who feel that the door slam is the only way to set boundaries. It is a way to set boundaries, but what I will say is that if the door slam is your only way to set boundaries, your life can be quite topsy-turvy. It can be very, you give, and then you have to slam the lid shut because you have nothing more to give. What about taking half of that giving that you're giving to other people and give it to yourself, direct it inwards? And then that way you don't have to, the pressure cooker doesn't kind of blow over, if that makes sense. But it is that 10-year-old inner child scientist's way of trying to preserve some of our integrity and our sense of self when we haven't gotten that sense of self from the unifier. So for me, the unifier is the main holder of the sense of who we are. When we learn to use the unifier in a way that asks, is this the right thing for me, and is it the right thing for other people? What are your thoughts on that yourself, Amelia?
Yeah, that's a lot of good information. And I think we could talk for a solid day about each of these parts. So I'm going to try to not tell everything I think about this. Some other examples of when the 10-year-old scientist can have a hard time for the INFJ is when it's trying to make sense out of things that don't logically can never make sense. So like I found myself, a tenant of mine passed away suddenly, and then I just kind of kept hearing this voice the next day, like, this doesn't make sense, this doesn't make sense. Like the action of events didn't make sense. So I realized that was my 10-year-old trying to understand and create some kind of logic around this. But in reality, sometimes there are situations that there is no logic, and it can't be. Like a thinking process is not always the right way to operate in the world. And sometimes it's just nice to remind that part of you, like, it's okay to not make sense of things sometimes, and not everything's going to make sense.
And that's your inner parent's job to gently remind that, because the 10-year-old inner child for the INFJ will freak out if something doesn't make sense, because that's literally all they know. That's all, it has to make sense. If it doesn't make sense, it's a threat, right? And that's why the unifier needs to step in there and say, sweetheart, it's okay if it doesn't make sense. You're okay right now, even if this doesn't make sense to you. It's okay. We can get through this. You're not alone with these thoughts. You're not alone with this decision. I'm going to make the main decision based on what's right for me and what's right for other people. And then I'd like you to be in a supportive role in telling me what maybe doesn't make sense, what we might need to learn some more information on, or if it's just a situation that absolutely doesn't make sense, I'd like you to, cross the T's and dot the I's to make sure that whatever we're putting across, if we're having to send an email or write a document, that it's all together. So you give them a little bit of that sense of empowerment, that power that they have to support the bigger picture, but that you don't ever leave them hanging on a cliff feeling like they're responsible for grown-up decisions, or that they should figure out how something should make sense, especially in those situations like with your tenant. May he rest in peace, there is absolutely no sense to it whatsoever. So,
And my final note there is, if you're an INFJ or even an INFP or whatever, and felt a sense of relaxation when Mary and I were saying, like, it's okay to not make sense, and this is okay. And that might sound like your 10-year-old or your another part of you for the INFP, your thinking part of you, is most likely feeling some kind of comfort with what we were saying and is getting some relaxation. So if you're feeling that, remember this and say this again to yourself. and see how it goes.
Yeah. Use these. Yeah, exactly. Perfect. So use these. I want to reiterate what Amelia just said. Use whatever gives you a sense of comfort and sense of hope and growth and positive kind of feelings that you're getting. And I'd love to hear them in the comment section of this video, or send us an email to let us know the positives you're taking away and things that made you really feel understood and looked after, because that is what we do. We're here to do that, to show you that you belong. We belong, and we have this, important job to do in the world. We are the introverted, the introspective, the intuitive feelers who are much needed in the world. And we have not only the right, but the obligation to bring our strengths to the world, to bring our strengths to the forefront of the world, so that we don't lose that as the world gets faster and faster. So, yeah. Are you ready to move on to the 3-year-old inner child?
Let's do it.
Okay, so the 3-year-old inner child for the INFJ is the outward sensing part of us, or the investigator. And I always smile when I'm talking about the investigator, because my 3-year-old is very precious to me. She's such a little sweetheart. The investigators cannot help themselves but to collect real-time feedback from the outside world. That's the job. So as an outward-facing part, the investigator uses the 5 senses to detect what's going on in the environment. And for us as INFJs, it's the part of us that collects information, but it's the part of us that can either feel really threatened by the environment, or can feel, so for example, hyper, like, or overstimulated, hyperstimulated if you have to be in busy environments a lot of the time, because they can only handle 10 to 15 minutes at a time, say crowds or a lot of input or whatever. So if you're an INFJ and you're having a hard time with this output that I'm doing on this particular one, they may be doing in 15-minute increments to really get the information in. But so I don't want to overload you, but so if that's what's happening, please excuse me. But I think as an information collector, on a strong way, then on a positive way, the INFJ 3-year-old is all about like the experiential thing, having the good vibes, having being in the nature, cuddling the dog. Some of the less or maybe more destructive ways is, drinking the wine, overeating, or over exercising yourself to a point of injury, or those kinds of sensory activities. But I think that one of the big challenges with INFJs for this 3-year-old, or even one of the more common challenges that INFJs have around this 3-year-old is we feel so at the mercy of life that we self-soothe excessively with things, be it helping other people, or drinking wine every day, or exercising too much and forgetting to actually tune into our bodies, and then we get injured. Those kinds of things where we overindulge in things that soothe that 3-year-old inner child. What are your thoughts, Amelia, on this?
Yeah, your 3-year-old also holds your biggest wounds and your biggest blind spots of this model here. So it's often, if someone's feeling not seen or completely alone, or a lot of the trauma can be traced back to this little 3-year-old inner child, and the more embraced it feels, the more it gets its sense of love for that part of you, the more happier and complete you will feel, because it's like there's 4 parts of you, but one is feeling left out, and you're going to feel that when it's that way. And I like to think of these different parts of you as having each of their own love languages. And it's like, if you're not feeding this part of you the way that it feels love, it's going to feel like its tank is empty. It's not going to feel happy. It's going to feel quite sad and unseen, and continue,
and even marginalized.
Continue that, yeah. So.
And often I find, like with INFJs in particular, if the love language of the 3-year-old is not fulfilled, then the marginalization, like you feel marginalized and you feel very alone. So if you cannot ask for your needs to be met by activating the inner parent, your 3-year-old inner child is effectively being cut off from the good experiences that he or she or they need to have in order to feel like they're part of the family and live a fulfilling life. So
yeah.
Can you give us your own 3-year-old experience where you kind of maybe discovered them and where they felt like they were part of the family?
It's a journey with these inner children. Personally, as an INFJ, I found that when my 3-year-old gets little bits of body movement every day, or like playing with the dog, and it doesn't have to be for an hour, it can be for like 10 minutes, I feel pretty happy. One of the best things that I could make sense of this part, because at first I'm like, I have no clue what this part of me is. It's like it's inside your mind and you're doing it, but you can't see it yet. So one of the best things that you have recommended is getting an autobiography based on the Myers-Briggs type that leads with this 3-year-old part of you. So a Myers-Briggs type that leads with outward sensing. And so that has really helped me start to hear the voice of that 3-year-old and understand where is this part of you? And also INFJs whose 3-year-old does not feel incorporated with the rest of their family can be quite serious, quite not engaging in fun, and they might think that people who have fun is dumb, just because that sensory part is your fun part. It's about being in the moment. It's about being okay with what's going on. And when this part of you is excluded from the rest of you, it's like you're operating in a way that isn't embracing the here and now. So that's another way with that 3-year-old.
And just on that, I want to jump onto that and just expand on it, because if you have that disconnect with the 3-year-old, and you don't have a way of conversing with them, especially if you've experienced trauma in your life, and if you perceive the world to be a dangerous place and you don't have a connection with your 3-year-old to have those conversations, you will have an unconscious bias towards everybody being out to get you, or that you can't trust anybody. So I just want to put that in there. And that certainly has been my experience personally in the past. I've had to work through a lot on that to be able to trust people and to really build those meaningful, truly caring and intimate relationships.
Yep. And I am
Go on.
I was going to say, I'm working through that right now. So if you feel like you can relate to that, I'll reach out, and we are happy to help you with what we can do based on your options. So don't feel like there is no hope.
Yeah, there is always hope. Please trust, and this is something that both INFJs and INFPs have in common, because we have such a solid solid trust in our intuition. And if our intuition is telling us that nobody knows as much as we do, please know that there's always somebody who's already experienced and worked through what you're working through right now. So you're not alone with the challenges. There are people who can help. If you feel nobody can understand, nobody can help me, that's not actually true. There are plenty of people who have already experienced and worked through the things that you're working through right now. And there's nothing wrong with asking for help. please ask for help.
Ready to move on?
Yeah, let's do INFP roundtable. I'm super excited about this. Our beautiful INFP friends. So
They're
a lot
wonderful.
of people often, a lot of people say, you know, because I've written those INFX programs, the Unveils, the Deep Dive, the Mastermind, you name it, it's been written. But because they're both for INFJs and INFPs, people criticize me without, of course, having done any of the programs. But this is the easiest way to criticize people, is when you haven't looked into the work. But when you know, people say, oh, but they don't have anything in common, they don't have any of the functions in common. Even here you can see that the adult self in a parent, 10-year-old and 3-year-old in our children are completely different to the INFJ. It's not so much about the functions. So our work is about your lived experience. And whilst the functions are very different in both INFJs and INFPs, the lived experience is very similar. And that's where we start from. And then once we look at your lived experience, then we start to look at your lived experience according to your personality type and according to your roundtable. Who are your functions? You know, who's your adult self? Who's your 10-year-old? What's their dynamic like? That kind of way. So there's a lot more to working with INFJs and INFPs than just saying, oh, they don't have any functions in common, so why are you even doing that? Well, it is because the lived experience is often the same, and the capacity for compassion and true care and authenticity between these types is something that is at very similar levels, which is unusual for most other types. So that's why. So the adult self, INFP adult self, the ethicist, one of my absolute favorite parts of any type, especially my INFP friends, because it has taught me personally a lot about how to stay true to myself and just embrace this part so much. So the ethicist, it's the ethicist's job to shift and sort through what's right and what's wrong. And because of the ethicist's honest and honorable and principled way of moving through the world, they righteously operate as the conscientious entity in the world. Because without the ethicist, the world would be a very corrupt place, you know, where people would be unethical and untrustworthy. And, you know, there'd be all that kind of power games and power grabbing, which granted, we can actually see quite a bit even these days. As an inward-facing individual, the ethicist's point of view of what's right and wrong originates from their subjective experience. And the ethicist promotes authenticity and individuality and can't be or do what they perceive to be the wrong thing. So at least not for very long. So let's just say that you're an INFP and you have a job that you don't love, that doesn't fulfill you. You can do it for a while, but you can't do it for very long. After a while, it will start breaking down. It feels like it's breaking down your soul, and you need to move on. And the same is true with relationships, and the same is true with, you know, anything that you see wrong in the world. It's like, I can go along with this for the time being, but after a while, I just can't do it anymore. And that form of setting boundaries with the world, especially for INFJs, is very inspiring. That's what it is. So because it's a decision maker, the ethicist forms very quick opinions about people, surroundings, and situations, and those kind of conclusions or those opinions are based often on their own parameter of purity. So is this right? Is this authentic? And from like a more practical perspective, the thing that's often said about INFPs, like the caricature, if you like, is that they're, you know, self-centered and inflexible, and they're just like navel gazing the whole time. Whereas what I see with the ethicist in particular, the inward feeling, is that there's so much insight that can't be brought out in a very fast, disposable way. So everything that an INFP's ethicist adult self does, it has to be as pure as possible. And sometimes another thing that people say about INFPs is that they're flaky and they don't get stuff done. But it's not about that. It's about, for me, it's about the level of purity hasn't been reached, so therefore I can't make a decision or I can't take action on that, and I need to keep building it until it hits that threshold, and then I can do it. And I have to say, I have the absolute pleasure of my partner's an INFP. He's one of the most inspiring people in the world. I have a pleasure and a privilege of being around a lot of really established INFPs, you know, from rocket scientists to professors to equestrians, high-level equestrians. And I gotta tell you, like, when an INFP hits that ethicist threshold in what they're doing, nothing will hold them back, nothing. And they will go for it, and they will do whatever they will do because they're so committed to that. So that's my experience on the ethicist for the INFP as the adult self. Your thoughts,
As
Amelia?
someone who does not have introverted feeling in my training for I don't want to get technical on that.
Yeah.
But it is admirable to watch people who are so aware of how they're feeling in the moment. Like if you tell INFJ and INFP bad news at the same time, INFPs can instantly realize how they're feeling. Like, yes. Oh my gosh, I feel horrible about this, or I feel terrible about this. Whereas INFJs often have to kind of like, well, we're gonna look at everyone's perspectives and how do I feel about this? Yeah. It might come out later and I'm just kind of gonna be impartial to it. So it is admirable to see that strength because we need people who can say when things are horrible and when things aren't going well.
Yeah.
For the world rather than an impartial. Being impartial isn't. It has its strengths. It has its weaknesses. It can have its weaknesses when it's like instantly bad news. Also, something that I have a client right now that I'm working with who's an INFP, and she is struggling with like, what do I do with my life? And as an introverted feeler, as an introverted intuitive feeler, I feel like it's very difficult to see what you're good at because it's so inward. Like it's inward, it's not tangible, it's with people, so you don't really get direct feedback with it. It's not like you can go build a house and like, and then people can be like, oh wow, it's a really good house, or you can get numbers on that.
That's right.
This can be a real catch up because she is often wondering, what am I good at? What am I good at? What am I good at?
Yeah.
And a part of my job, I feel like, is to teach her to look at the strengths that she has with other people that she might not be aware of yet. So if you're thinking this as well, remember that just that you do have strengths and just staying open to them and maybe asking people around you what you are good at will be helpful because INFPs are so wonderful to be around. And they might not be aware of it.
Ask people who you trust and respect for their feedback on who you are. And don't just do the self-indulgent thing where you go to everybody and ask everybody and just go, oh, this feels so nice. Write that stuff down. Write it down so that you can start reading it every morning when you get out of the bed. These are my strengths. So now you're solidifying a new learning about yourself. And that then opens a whole lot of other doors to who you're becoming, which kind of really nicely opens up the pioneer space, because the pioneers, of course, the inner parent for the INFP, the pioneer is all about opening those doors and going like, yeah, that's an option, that's a possibility, could do that, what about that, you know, and as the main way of collecting information for INFPs, especially when INFPs are healthy, when they're using the Pioneer, they can really look for the opportunities that seem like unseen, like people don't see. But because as an INFP, and especially with the ethicist, you have such a high level or deep level of understanding and capacity to, like emotional capacity, you can actually see opportunities. If your Pioneer is healthy, you can see opportunities that normal people wouldn't necessarily see. But then, of course, if it's if the Pioneer is not very healthy, then it's looking for what could go wrong. And then if the Pioneer is overridden, and we go into the historian space, we'll talk about that in a little bit, then that's a whole different story in relation to how difficult life can get for the INFPs. So the inner parent Pioneer is outward facing in its orientation. And so they have the opposite job and the opposite orientation to the adult self. And the Pioneer it's the Pioneer's job to conquer new frontiers, especially with INFPs. As I just said, the depth of knowledge and understanding and emotional capacity. The Pioneer has the ability to fearlessly go intuitively into spaces that haven't been explored before. And they're usually doing it for the benefit of everyone. So as an outward facing part, the Pioneer operates in the outside world and doesn't make decisions, of course, because the information collecting part of the INFP, but it delivers the findings to a decision maker that's then going to make the decisions. And the Pioneer is predominantly future oriented, which means that it's most concerned about what's possible and what can happen in the future. And I think the kind of the caricature of the Pioneer is the flakiness, bringing back to the flakiness of the INFP, the flakiness, and the whole thing of not wanting to commit to a thing, or something that I also hear a lot from, especially partners of INFPs, is that INFPs say one thing but don't follow through. They like keeping those options open, but they might say, I'm doing this, but in fact, they're not doing that. They're just talking about doing it. So there's confusion for a lot of, especially J's in the Myers-Briggs system, with this INFP Pioneer piece, where people just feel like they don't commit to anything, they don't want to plan anything, they just want to keep everything open-ended. So that's the kind of the biggest complaint, if you like, that I get from people about INFPs. However, and this is a real personal example, I observe my partner Peter. I'm not using him as an example because he's my partner. I'm using him as an example because he is a beautiful example of highly empowered INFP because he's worked in the personal development industry for decades. I mean, before coaching was even a thing in personal development. So 30 plus years. And so he can use his Pioneer in a way that he looks that, okay, there's that problem. Now, how do I solve these two problems? What is the solution to these two problems that is elegant and that we can create more kind of structure between the two problems that seem to be completely not related, right? So there's this problem that's completely unrelated to this one. And then I'm looking at him, I'm literally sometimes looking at him, he's thinking, and his eyes just go like this, and he's just looking at the different things, and then he's looking up, and he's kind of going like this, and then he's like, okay, so here's what we can do. If we build this kind of a structure, so he's bringing a little bit of that 3-year-old executive in there. If we build this kind of a structure, we can solve this problem and this problem simultaneously. But what it'll also do is it'll solve this and 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 that problem. So it's this whole like there are so many consequences, positive consequences to the resolution of just two seemingly unrelated problems. And that, to me, you know, when people say about INFPs, oh, they're flaky, they don't keep, you know, their timelines, blah, blah, blah. Well, they don't, because they're doing so much more than you could ever imagine. And if you have the patience with people, then the resolutions or what comes out are just so much more profound that you could have ever thought. So that's my thought on the pioneer. What about you, Amelia?
Something that I tend to see with INFPs is when they're in that pioneer phase, they're like, their heads up and they're like looking at options. It's like all of these things can happen. All of these things can happen. But when they are gathering information, because remember that 10-year-old does the same thing as that inner parent, that it's often looking downward and they're kind of closed off to options, and they're just like, the past is the past, things are always going to be the same. So it's really important to get engaged with that inner parent if you are an INFP. And just like how you get the most bang for your buck as an INFJ working with that inner parent, it's the same for INFPs. So you need to strengthen this part of you to live the authentic and meaningful life that you want to live. And without this, it's going to be very, very, very challenging to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Shall we go to the historian? So I'm a little bit distracted with our Sambo here. Sambo's been unwell and now he's doing well again. So, you know, our pets, INF types and our pets. Anyhow, so the historian, the INFP, inward sensing 10-year-old inner child. The historian is, remember, as a 10-year-old, the black and white version of a lot of ourselves, really. They kind of think it's this way or that way. It can't be both. And it's the job of the historian to remember everything that happened in the past and then use that, bring that information to try and keep you safe and nurtured in the future and right now and in the future. The historian relies on its subjective, because it's inward facing, it relies on its subjective experiences from the past to gather that information. So whatever your experience in the past was, you think that that is the only experience that there is. Because remember, 10-year-old, black and white, and historian, which means referring to past experiences and assuming that that's exactly what's going to happen before or going forward. And when we bring this into the roundtable model for INFPs, the thing that I hear most about INFPs is that they can get really broody, they can get really like depressed, they can get really negative, stubborn, all those kinds of things. And that's what a lot of people describe the kind of this part of the INFP. Whereas for me, it really is a matter, like with every one of these people, there can be positives and there can be negatives. And with this pioneer, with this historian, the main thing that I like to focus on when it comes to that INFP piece and working with INFPs is the deep sense of conviction. So once they have found what's right for them, there's a deep sense of conviction for that. But also there's such loyalty with INFPs that I've actually never experienced with any other type. Because once the loyalty is established, it's going to be very hard to break that loyalty, to a point where, you know, INFPs can stay in the wrong relationships for a long time out of loyalty. And that's tough, because now they have two warring parts. On one hand, they know it's not right. So the ethicist is, you know, kind of has their backup. And then the historian comes in and says, but no, but this is, you know, this is what this is how it is, and this is how it's always been, and it's not going to be any better anywhere else, and you know, this is the person, this is the right person. And so it's almost like the INFPs can stay in wrong relationships for a really long time, even though they know it's not right. So they can create this, they can get depressed because they don't feel like they have the power to change the circumstances. When in fact, if they engage the pioneer, they could go, okay, well, that's an option, and that's an option, and that's an option. So you could actually look at, what are my options here, rather than feeling like you're stuck in that. And that's one of the challenges as well with the INFP historian 10-year-old, is with depression. So once you get depressed, it's extra hard for the INFPs to get out of that situation, because you have felt that profound level of suppression or oppression that your historian may have already established that as a fact. That's always going to be the same thing in the future. So whatever they've experienced in the past, they project that it's always going to be like that. So that's why it can be difficult to break the depression pattern for INFPs, because they don't see a way out, whereas the way out is to engage the pioneer and really get into that. But my most amazing thing that I really love about this historian 10-year-old INFP is the traditions that they create, for the benefit of everyone, and with the care, the individualization of it with everyone. It just, the INFP's capacity to allow people to be exactly who they are is just something that speaks and just cuts straight through my heart, like it hits me where I live. What about you?
I was having a conversation with someone who has this 10-year-old historian recently, the past couple of days, and one thing that came out of his mouth, he said, I knew, he got upset with me about something because he knew that I was going to say this thing that I've said in the past, because I've always said it in the past. And I knew right then that was that 10-year-old coming out to say, I know what you're going to do in the future because you've always done it in the past. And if you allow that 10-year-old to control what you think about other people, you're not going to allow people to change. And you're also not going to allow relationships to change. So just check to see what your thoughts are with that. Check to see where you are thinking thoughts like this. Because that can really keep you stuck in a place that you're not allowing the people to be different, and that's really projecting onto other people as well.
What's your positive experience with the 10-year-old historian?
I love how they can remember things so vividly. That's a huge strength, because personally I have terrible memory. So it's fun for me to be around. They're like, oh, remember that? I was like, I do not, but it's amazing that you do. And it's amazing that they can be like, oh yeah, this is so important to me. This is like what things did you do with this in the past? And I'm so forward focused that it's important for me to realize that there is a sense of importance. There is value and good things about the past.
And seeing how far you've come too. That's so important for especially personal development, right? Because it can feel like you're always going to keep going, because you will always learn. You'll always keep developing. Nice. Okay, shall we do the 3-year-old executive?
Let's do it.
Okay, so the 3-year-old inner child for the INFP is the executive, or the outward-facing thinker. And I'm always smiling when I talk about this part, because this is one of my favorite parts of all time. I think it's because it's a shadow piece of my 10-year-old, and my 10-year-old is such an important part of my life. But I love the executive. And the executive considers itself to be the master of effectiveness. So it finds the most direct and practical and powerful way to build efficiency and efficiently running structures in the world. So out there, outward facing thinking about structures, building structures in the outside world. And without this part of us, without this part of the INFP, the potential of the self and others would not be fully actualized, because this executive just wants to get stuff done. The executive also wants to test out the plan in real time, see if it works and what needs to be tweaked. So what serves the end result can stay, and what doesn't and serve the end result, that can go. So very kind of cutthroat. And as a thinker, the executive makes the decisions based on logic and don't really concern emotions or feelings of the self or other people. And I think this brings me really nicely to what people usually criticize the INFPs about when it comes to the 3-year-old inner child, the executive, the thinking function, is that they're very feeling and facilitating until they're not, and then they're horribly offensive and cutthroat, like straight. And because the INFPs know what your soft spots are, so they can just slice you right open. And has it happened to me? Yes, it has. Do I see it as a negative? Do I characterize INFPs like this? I don't, because I understand that it's not actually, they're using the effective part of them. They're using the executive part of them to try and preserve their own dignity in some way. So especially in situations of conflict, it's easy to criticize somebody when they're triggered, but can you think of a time when you have been triggered? And if you can't, you should think harder, because we've all been triggered. So what I actually really like about the executive 3-year-old, especially in the INFP, is, and this has saved me so much time, is, and again, I'll use Peter as an example, because he's a master. He's a master at this. Is he can tell me, we're having a business meeting, so we support each other's businesses, we coach each other on a weekly basis, and I have this thing where I go, okay, I'm thinking about doing this and this, and he just goes, okay, don't do that. And it feels really, and it's a 3-year-old in a positive way, and it can feel, for somebody who's not secure in themselves, it can feel really invalidated, that they're like dismissing your idea. But actually what they're doing is they're saving you a lot of time, when in fact they're going to come up with a better idea for you on how you can get to your end result, because they have the executive and I don't. So this is what I love about this 3-year-old inner child on the INFP, even though it's not particularly, it can be confrontational because it's not necessarily fluent. I mean, in Peter it is, because he's been doing coaching for so long. He's not going to just go like, no, in those situations. But he has the capacity to do that if that's the case. What I really love about that part is when the INFP has harnessed that part, and it feels like it's a part of you, and you're embracing that part of you. That part, that executive part, has the power to give really good, constructive criticism about what you're doing and how you're getting it done. And that's what I love about that part. What are your experiences, Amelia?
So I know INFPs love their feeling functions. I know that they take a lot of pride in that.
Most of the time.
Not all the
always.
time, yes. Yeah. But it's also important to remember that feeling can't always make the decision, because the feeling part of them cannot, it just doesn't do well with facts. It doesn't do well with data. And sometimes we need a part of us to come in and slice things out and be the one that's like, this isn't effective. I'm not going to keep doing this. Yeah. So it's really important to see the strengths of that side of them.
Yeah.
And then it's also important to remember that when the INFP is unhealthy, they can make the decisions about their self-worth with this part of them.
Yes.
So it's like your self-worth, who you are as a person, does not matter how much stuff you get done in the world. You INFP.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. It's like that. That is no. It's like if you guys got the dishes done today, that doesn't matter.
Yeah. It's
that
no
doesn't matter if you're a
indication
good
of
person.
Yeah.
So
yeah. You're probably, sorry, if you're an INFP, you're probably a good person. You don't have to clean the kitchen and groom the dogs to be a good person. Yeah. Even though the 3-year-old might want you to do those things.
Yeah. So it's just that, and that 3-year-old can stop thinking that and realize that it won't, like that it doesn't matter with the help of that inner parent. So that executive really needs the support of that inner parent to get to where the INFP wants to go. So.
Yes. Yeah. And also then when you do harness the 3-year-old inner child, as you said, there are some cutthroat decisions that we all have to make. And we can have that executive in a very supportive position and a supportive role to the ethicist, that they come together and together they make decisions, but that the executive is in fact in the supportive role and the ethicist gets to decide 80%, gets to make 80% of the decision and say, this is the right thing to do, as opposed to this is the most effective thing to do. Sometimes the most effective thing is not the right thing to do, and vice versa. Yeah. Look, I could keep going about this forever. Like, as I said at the start of this episode, oh my goodness, we'll never leave. But we do need to stop at some stage. So I reckon that's a good place to stop for today. Did you have anything more you wanted to say in relation to that, Amelia, before we start wrapping up?
My final, just what I was going to say at the very end is when your life is balanced and when you feel good and when it's like you feel happy, these inner children feel safe and secure. And this is for everyone. So the more you can work on getting these inner children to feel happy and feel like they have a place and they trust these adult parts of you, the top 2 parts of the table, your life is going to get so much easier. And I just want people to understand this. I don't know if they can I'm just like, this is, it's just the, like you said at the beginning, it's the lottery win. And that's up to you, and you have total control over that.
Absolutely. I mean, understanding what drives us to make the decisions, or what collects us to make the what makes us collect the information that we do. That's what increases our ability to live really consciously. So the more we become conscious of these things, the more we can make more authentic decisions for ourselves. So we go from simply existing into actually being, and maybe even being at the receiving end of the life, like just trying to hold on for our dear lives. We go from that into making those informed decisions, which then can be aligned with the kind of life that we want to build. So as you said, that power piece, it gives us a power to systematically create the kind of life that we want to live. And with good decisions and time, we begin to trust ourselves more. We begin to trust others more. We discover our previously hidden parts that we haven't seen before. We begin to consciously wander down our life's purpose path, which is so exciting for me. We discover a whole new level of belonging. Our relationships change for the better. We make better decisions around personal boundaries and relational boundaries. And when we make better decisions, our finances improve because we are more rounded and stop maybe doing the emotional spending and, for stress relief. So we find other ways to relieve stress than abuse ourselves financially. So our quality of life truly just changes to a place where we can feel comfortable in our own skin, just as we are. And we don't have to try to keep up with the Joneses anymore. And overall, the power that good decisions have is to bring the calm and the connection into our lives. And as such, they allow us to consciously take charge of our own lives and how we do want to live. And if I know anything about INFJs and INFPs, I promise we want to live an authentic life experience that looks like us, and we want to be accepted for who we are. So thank you everyone for your time today. It has been such a privilege to share this work with you, and join us again to our next episode of these real conversations with INFJs and INFPs. And if you've liked what you've heard, we'd love you to share this conversation with a friend who might benefit from it, or a colleague who's struggling, that you might know that they're an INFJ or an INFP and they're struggling to understand themselves, or a family member whom you would like to understand you better. I'd love you to share this. So anybody who you think that needs to hear this. And if you have any questions for us, please send them to desk@infxproject.com. So thank you, Amelia. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your time today. And we'll see you at the next episode of Real Conversations with INFJs and INFPs. See you next time.